In the spring of 200 BC, near the small town of Zama in North Africa, roughly 30,000 soldiers of Rome clashed with an army of around 40 to 50,000 men from Carthage. The Romans were a battle-hardened force with their legions spearheaded by a brilliant commander, Scipio Africanus, who was only 25 years old at the time. They stood toe-to-toe with one of history's greatest generals, Hannibal Barca, whose legendary name still strikes fear into the hearts of even seasoned veterans. And though the Carthaginians outnumbered the Romans, they too were battle-scarred and weary after more than a decade of war. The Roman victory that followed would bring an end to the Second Punic War and establish Rome as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. But this was not an easy victory. The Second Punic War between Rome and Carthage had been raging across the Mediterranean for nearly 16 years. It all began when Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, took command of Carthaginian forces in Spain. He aimed to conquer the Iberian Peninsula for Carthage, and he was doing quite well until the Romans sent Scipio Africanus to deal with him. In 218 BC, Scipio chased Hasdrubal into battle where he was killed and his head cut off, then shipped back to Rome as a trophy. Following his big victory, Scipio and the Roman Senate agreed that it was finally time to invade North Africa itself. The plan was to attack Carthage at its core and destroy Hannibal's ability to wage war once and for all. Hannibal, however, was not willing to let this happen. After regrouping, he marched out to meet the invaders and nearly destroyed the Roman army at the Battle of the Trebia. Only thanks to bad decisions by Hannibal himself did the Romans live to fight another day. Hannibal followed up this tactical victory with a strategic one at the Battle of Lake Trasimene. By luring the Roman consul Gaius Flaminius into an ambush, Hannibal nearly wiped out the entire Roman force, killing or capturing all but 4,000 of them. With the destruction of Flaminius's consular army, Hannibal hoped to strike terror into the hearts of the Romans and end the war before it even began. Instead, the opposite happened. Though the Romans had lost badly, they refused to give up. Rome's total commitment to destroying Carthage rallied the Italian allies, and volunteers flocked from all over Italy to join the war effort. From Rome, young Scipio Africanus received command of this new army, which he brought to North Africa to confront Hannibal once again. Scipio set up his base camp at the city of Utica, while Hannibal, confident in his superiority, chose a fortified camp nearby. Both commanders spent months cautiously probing each other's defenses before either would commit to an assault. Finally, in early 200 BC, Scipio decided to attack. The Roman army set out from their camp and marched across the plain to a rise about 1 mile from the Carthaginian camp. There they drew up their battle lines. For the Romans, their standard manipular legionary formation was fielded. But this time, cavalry played a key role. The bulk of the Roman cavalry was made up of light cavalrymen who served as skirmishers and screened the advance of the heavy infantry. These men were also excellent at scouting and pursuing routed enemy forces. But the real stars of the show were the Numidian cavalrymen who served as allies of Rome. Under the command of Massinissa, these horsemen were lightly armed and armored, but were exceptional at hit-and-run tactics. Their presence alongside the Romans would prove devastating. Hannibal responded to the Roman deployment with his own battle plan. His battle line was identical to that of the Romans, with a few notable differences. At the center of the line, directly facing the Roman infantry, was Hannibal's elite shock troops. These were veteran mercenaries who had seen years of combat and were eager to finish the war once and for all. Either side of the mercenaries were Hannibal's war elephants, with their lit candelabers and armored sides. The elephants faced outward, pointed at the Roman cavalry so that they could support the mercenaries if needed. On paper, Hannibal had the edge. He had more troops than Scipio, and those troops were battle-hardened. The Romans had no idea what they were up against. And so the battle started with the Romans marching forward. The Roman infantry charged into the center of the Carthaginian lines while the cavalry advanced along the flanks. As the Roman infantry advanced, they were met by volleys of arrows from Carthaginian archers. Once the two armies were close enough, the fighting became hand-to-hand. In the center, the Roman maniples engaged the Carthaginian mercenaries. But the Romans were having trouble. The Carthaginian swords were long and sharp, and their shields were large and strong. Before long, the Romans began to fall back. Just as things seemed to be going poorly for the Romans, however, the cavalry struck home. The Roman cavalry, especially the Numidians, tore into the Carthaginian flanks. Hannibal's light infantry was no match for the disciplined Roman horsemen. Soon, the entire Carthaginian flank was in full flight. But it was far from over yet. See, Hannibal had deployed his war elephants to counter the Roman cavalry. Now that the Roman infantry was falling back, the elephants were free to charge. As they crashed into the Roman cavalry, the tide of battle seemed to turn again. But then something unexpected happened. The Romans were ready for the elephants. According to Polybius, as the elephants approached, the Roman cavalry scattered and the elephants came thundering into open ground. They trampling over one another in confusion, trampling and goring one another's tusks and shrieking loudly, making the whole plain tremble. The elephants broke through the Roman lines, wreaking havoc in their wake. Then they turned on each other. A similar account is given by Livy, who writes that the elephants panicked, seeing their riders fleeing, and charged into one another, clashing tuskrump to tuskrump, slaying some of their own kind and some of the enemy. When they were done, the ground was littered with elephant carcasses. With the elephants out of the way, the Roman cavalry returned to the fray and finished off the Carthaginian mercenaries. The rest of the Carthaginians fled the field and Hannibal barely escaped with his life. By nightfall, the Romans had won a decisive victory. Though the Romans were victorious, the exact numbers are debatable and often exaggerated. Most historians agree that the Carthaginians suffered around 20,000 casualties with only 2,000 captured, while the Romans lost about 1,500 men. Following his victory, Scipio Africanus was celebrated like a god in Rome. He was awarded the cognomen Africanus, and his statue was erected in the Roman Forum. The cognomen of his family changed from Africanus to Africanus Major, meaning the elder Africanus, to distinguish him from his descendants who would also win victories in Africa. He went on to win another battle against Hannibal in Spain and was considered one of the most important Roman generals of the Republic. As for Hannibal, he fled to Syria and spent his last years trying to make a comeback, but to no avail. He would forever be known for his great victories against Rome, but also for his loss at the Battle of Zama. For Carthage, the peace treaty that followed the battle was anything but favorable. Carthage was forced to give up all of their conquests in Spain and North Africa. They also had to pay a massive indemnity to Rome and open their ports to Roman ships. To ensure that Carthage wouldn't attack Rome again, Roman garrisons were stationed in the city to watch over its citizens and prevent any future aggression. Carthage had once been Rome's greatest rival, but now they were nothing more than a client state. For Rome, the victory at Zama secured their dominance in the western Mediterranean and marked the beginning of their imperial expansion. With the Carthaginians neutralized, there was nothing standing in the way of Rome's growing power. So what do you think? How might the outcome of the battle have been different if Hannibal had been able to get his elephants into the Roman infantry before they fell back? Or what if the Roman cavalry hadn't been prepared for the elephants? Let us know in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, subscribe and comment for more videos like this. Scipio Africanus is famous for defeating Hannibal Barca at the Battle of Zama in 200 BCE, ending the Second Punic War. One of Hannibal's greatest strengths was his use of war elephants. Yet they had little effect on the outcome of the battle. So how did Scipio defeat Hannibal's elephants? There are 5 reasons why Hannibal lost the battle. If you watch till the end, we'll tell you what they are. Let's get started. At the start of the battle, Hannibal decided to repeat one of his greatest victories, the Battle of Cannae, where his army of 40,000 men and 80 elephants defeated a larger Roman force. This time, however, Hannibal's army was smaller than his opponents. And he hoped to achieve a similar result by enticing the Romans into a narrow defile where he could unleash his war elephants against them. The defiles were narrow passes between hills, mountains or rivers, forcing armies to move in single file and making them vulnerable to concentrated attacks. Hannibal likely believed that once inside the defile, he would be able to direct his war elephants against the Roman infantry, inflicting massive casualties and achieving another stunning victory. But Scipio Africanus wasn't fooled. He knew the danger of the defile and deliberately led his army there. However, he also knew it would be the perfect place to destroy Hannibal's war elephants, giving him an advantage in the fight. So the first reason Hannibal lost the battle was because of Scipio's trap. While Hannibal had certainly benefited from using war elephants in previous battles, particularly in the famous Battle of Cannae against the Romans, their effectiveness could be mitigated with proper preparation and strategy. Scipio Africanus employed several specific tactics to neutralize the threat posed by Hannibal's war elephants at the Battle of Zama, showcasing how a skilled general could overcome such formidable opponents. The first tactic employed by Scipio was forming his manipular infantry formations with wide lanes or channels between the units. This allowed the charging elephants to pass through these gaps without disrupting the Roman infantry line significantly. This was crucial because it prevented the elephants from causing the sort of devastating casualties that Hannibal had achieved in Cannae. Instead, the elephants continued their charge right into the Roman formations and out the other side without inflicting mass casualties. This required careful planning and coordination among the Roman infantry units to maintain their cohesion and discipline as the elephants thundered past. In addition to creating wide lanes in his infantry formations, Scipio also deployed light skirmishers known as velites ahead of his main battle line. When Hannibal signaled for the elephants to charge, these velites moved forward into the open areas between the Roman infantry blocks. There, they harassed the charging elephants by throwing javelins at them. This not only aimed to inflict damage on the elephants, but also to provoke them and goad them forward. The javelins thrown by the velites forced the elephants to keep moving and prevented them from changing direction, guiding them along the paths created by the Roman infantry. Once the elephants were committed to their path, the velites would then quickly retreat back through the lanes, essentially using the elephants' momentum against them and driving them deeper into the Roman formations. Another important tactic Scipio employed was using noise and visual disturbances to frighten and confuse the elephants. Roman soldiers shouted loudly, blew trumpets and banged their weapons on their shields to create a cacophony of sound and commotion. This auditory onslaught, coupled with the sight of the maneuvering infantry and darting skirmishers, would have been disorienting for the elephants, who are known to be sensitive to noise and visual stimuli. This tactic would have caused some elephants to panic, possibly trampling their own troops or breaking ranks and veering off course. By introducing these distractions, Scipio aimed to disrupt the coordinated movements of Hannibal's elephant riders and break their ranks, reducing their effectiveness as a cohesive unit. As the elephants charged through the lanes created by the Roman infantry and javelin-wielding skirmishers, they became vulnerable to more direct attacks. Heavier Roman troops positioned along the flanks of the lanes would unleash volleys of javelins at the passing elephants. These coordinated javelin attacks from the sides would have inflicted additional injuries on the already harassed elephants, further disrupting their formation and weakening their ability to fight back effectively. The combination of javelin volleys from the sides and harassing attacks from the skirmishers forced the elephants to endure significant casualties without being able to fully engage the Roman troops, minimizing the damage they could inflict on the Roman lines. After the elephants passed through his infantry, Scipio unleashed his cavalry to finish Hannibal's army. Although Hannibal Barca's war elephants played a significant role in his victories during the Second Punic War, including the famous Battle of Cannae, their effectiveness was limited due to several factors. First, elephants were expensive and time-consuming to acquire and maintain. Their size and strength made them challenging to transport, and they required specialized care and training, limiting the number of elephants that could be effectively utilized in battle. Additionally, elephants were vulnerable to certain terrains and weather conditions. Their heavy weight could make them susceptible to fatigue and injury, and they struggled in marshy or mountainous regions, hampering their mobility and battlefield performance. Furthermore, the success of elephant warfare depended heavily on the skill and discipline of the riders and handlers. Inexperienced or poorly trained handlers could easily lose control of the elephants, leading to unpredictable behavior and reduced effectiveness. Finally, elephants were not a versatile weapon. They were primarily suited for open battlefields where their size and strength could be fully utilized. In dense forest or urban environments, their mobility was restricted, and they could not navigate narrow streets or engage in close-quarters combat effectively. Their long preparation time and high maintenance needs also limited their strategic flexibility. Armies using elephants had to carefully plan their deployment and couldn't just use them as a surprise element or in response to sudden changes in battle plans. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio Africanus took advantage of all these limitations and was able to defeat Hannibal's army despite the presence of war elephants. The Roman victory at the Battle of Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War and solidified Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean. The decisive battle occurred when Hannibal's war elephants attempted to break through the center of the Roman lines. Scipio's troops had prepared for this eventuality and withstood the initial shock of the elephant assault. The Roman infantry stood firm, minimizing the damage inflicted by the tusks and the proboscises of the elephants. And the disciplined Roman cavalrymen on the wings of the battlefield were ready to exploit any openings that appeared in Hannibal's battle line. As the battle progressed, Scipio's cavalry, including the elite Numidian horsemen under the command of Massinissa, launched a series of well-timed attacks. Hannibal's cavalry tried to counter this threat, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by Scipio's forces. The Carthaginians lacked the mobility and versatility to match the Roman cavalry, and soon they began to fall back. Seeing the cavalry wavering, Hannibal desperately ordered his remaining elephants to reinforce his infantry, attempting to create a solid defensive wall with the beasts. However, the arrival of reinforcements gave Scipio's cavalry the opening they needed to strike decisively. With the Carthaginian cavalry routed and their infantry struggling to hold the line, Hannibal's forces crumbled under the pressure. His infantry, exhausted and demoralized, could not withstand the relentless attacks of the Roman legions. The Battle of Zama ended in a decisive Roman victory, bringing an end to the Second Punic War. So the second reason Hannibal lost the battle was because his cavalry was weaker than the Roman cavalry. For example, his cavalry counted around 6,000 men, while Rome brought 4,000 cavalrymen to the battle. Scipio had excellent cavalry commanders like Publius Cornelius Scipio, Africanus the Elder, and the Numidian king Massinissa. Reason no. 3. Hannibal lacked adequate supplies for a prolonged campaign. He assumed the war would be short, so he didn't bring enough rations and equipment. But the Second Punic War lasted longer than expected, and this shortage of supplies weakened his army. Reason no. 4. The terrain favored the Roman army. The plains of northern Africa provided an open space for Scipio's cavalry to maneuver and operate. This limited the usefulness of Hannibal's infantry and war elephants, which excelled in mountainous or forested areas. And the last reason Hannibal lost the battle was because of his indecisiveness. Hannibal hesitated to commit his full strength at Zama, hoping to avoid a decisive engagement. This cautious approach prevented him from exploiting his advantages and allowed Scipio to gain the upper hand. If you want to know more about Hannibal Barca and his feats, click on this video next. When we think of ancient battles, images of massed infantry, locked shields and rattling chariots often come to mind. But few engagements illustrate the pivotal role cavalry can play, like the Battle of Zama. This confrontation between Rome and Carthage in 200 BC was more than just another clash of arms. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse where two brilliant commanders, Scipio Africanus and Hannibal Barca, used their cavalry to outmaneuver and outthink each other. Today we'll explore how these noble steeds and their riders decided the outcome of the battle and the Second Punic War itself. Before we get into the battle, let's take a look at the two opposing cavalry forces. The Carthaginians under Hannibal had about 40 elephants and 10,000 cavalrymen, while Scipio had roughly 6,000 cavalrymen, including 3,000 heavy cavalry. Of the Carthaginian cavalry, 2,000 were Numidians. Now, if that name rings a bell, you may have watched our previous video on Massinissa, king of Numidia. If not, you should definitely check it out after this one. Anyway, what makes the Numidians interesting is that they fought on both sides during the Second Punic War. When Hannibal invaded Italy, he recruited Numia cavalry, along with others from various regions, and used them to great effect. You've probably heard of Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with elephants and cavalry. Well, without those Numia horsemen, that famous feat may never have happened. In the early stages of the war, Massinissa was allied with Carthage, but later switched to Rome. So why the switch? Well, when Hannibal seized control of western Mediterranean trade routes, Massinissa felt threatened and sought an alliance with Rome. He provided a cavalry contingent to Hannibal's forces for the invasion of Italy, but secretly negotiated with Rome anyway. Into 10 BC, he switched sides, allying with Rome against Carthage. Rome rewarded his defection with land in Spain. That said, the Numidian cavalry remained loyal to Rome and followed Massinissa's lead. Now, back to the Battle of Zama. The Carthaginian plan involved encircling the Romans with infantry and using cavalry to keep them from escaping. However, Scipio anticipated this tactic and ordered his cavalry to engage the Carthaginians before they could form their encirclement. Massinissa personally led the Numia cavalry, and the Romans had 800 Numia horsemen. With them were contingents from other regions such as cavalry archers from Cales and heavy cavalry from the Balearic Islands. Meanwhile, Hannibal deployed 3,000 Spanish and Gallic cavalry alongside the Numia horsemen. The engagement began with an exchange of arrows, but soon turned into a melee when the cavalry charged. The Numidians rode in tight formation, wielding long spears and curved swords. Their horses were smaller than the war horses favored by the Romans and Gauls, but were quicker and more agile. The Numia horsemen also wore protective clothing, including helmets with cheek guards and elaborate neck armor. As the battle raged, the cavalry fought fiercely, but Scipio's forces slowly gained the upper hand. As the Romans drove the enemy back, Hannibal realized the danger. His army was being flanked, which could spell disaster. To fix the Romans in place, he ordered his infantry to push forward and take the offensive. But here's the thing, most of the Punic infantry were not native Africans or Spaniards. They were mercenaries from various regions across the Mediterranean. Unlike the citizen soldiers of Rome, these mercenaries often lacked discipline and cohesion. Nevertheless, Hannibal managed to stabilize the situation for a time, but it was only a temporary reprieve. Soon the cavalry on the flanks would be upon them. As the battle reached its climax, Massinissa made a critical decision. Instead of pursuing the enemy cavalry further, he turned his attention to Hannibal's infantry. He knew that defeating the infantry would deliver a death blow to the Carthaginians. Leading a group of horsemen, he charged into Hannibal's camp, catching the Carthaginians off guard. The Numia cavalry attacked with precision, targeting the enemy's baggage train and support services. They cut supply lines and disrupted Hannibal's ability to reinforce his front ranks. It was a brilliant move that exploited a weakness in Hannibal's strategy. You see, the strength of Hannibal's army lay in his cavalry and light infantry. His heavy infantry were mercenaries, often ill-disciplined and unreliable. While they held the line initially, they were vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. And that's exactly what happened. Massinissa's cavalry struck at the weak point, driving a wedge into Hannibal's battle lines. Meanwhile, Scipio exploited the confusion in Hannibal's ranks. He led a force of 6,000 heavy infantry, 4,000 light infantry and 2,000 cavalry in a pincer movement. One part of this force attacked head-on, drawing Hannibal's attention. Meanwhile, another detachment, largely composed of Numidian cavalry, flanked the Carthaginian left. This double-pronged attack proved too much for Hannibal's army. As the battle raged, the tide turned decisively against the Carthaginians. The Numia cavalry played a pivotal role in this transformation. Their mobility and skill allowed them to shift rapidly from engaging the enemy cavalry to striking the vulnerable flanks and rear of Hannibal's infantry. By exploiting the weaknesses in Hannibal's battle formations, the Numia horsemen effectively sealed the fate of the Carthaginian army. This defeat marked the end of the Second Punic War and Hannibal's military career. The war had lasted 14 years, far longer than any other conflict Rome had faced. It had tested the Roman Republic to its core and claimed countless lives on both sides. But it was at Zama that the scales tipped definitively in Rome's favor. The victory at Zama was a testament to both Scipio's generalship and the Numia cavalry's prowess. It also marked a turning point in military history. The battle showed that cavalry alone could not decide major conflicts and that combined arms tactics employing both cavalry and infantry were essential for victory. After the battle, Masiniss's loyalty to Rome was rewarded. He was officially recognized as king of Numidia and was given territories previously held by Carthage. His son, Micipsa, even became heir to the throne of Rome's African province. The Numia cavalry continued to serve Rome well in subsequent conflicts, securing Roman dominance in North Africa for decades to come. So why does the Battle of Zama matter today? Well, because it provides valuable lessons about strategy, tactics, and leadership. It shows us that even the most brilliant commanders and elite troops can be defeated if they do not adapt to changing circumstances. Hannibal's decision to emphasize cavalry over infantry proved costly at Zama, as did his failure to anticipate Scipio's flanking maneuver. On the other hand, Scipio's willingness to exploit enemy weaknesses and use his cavalry effectively to flank Hannibal's infantry was a masterclass in military thinking. Furthermore, the battle highlights the importance of discipline, training, and logistics. Hannibal's mercenaries may have been fierce fighters, but their lack of cohesion and discipline contributed to their defeat. Similarly, Hannibal's failure to adequately secure his supply lines left his troops vulnerable to Masiniss's cavalry. These factors, along with the cavalry's decisive role in the battle, make the Battle of Zama an essential study for anyone interested in military history or strategy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so and join our growing community. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.